Καλησπέρα σε όλους. Αυτά ήταν τα ελληνικά για σήμερα. I'll switch to English. So, really proud that this is our first CX Greece. Actually, it's the fourth, but it's the first that we're doing in English. And first of all, for the introductions, for the ones that are first time in this kind of event, I'm Kostas. I'm one of the managing partners in REBORRN, and just for the history, we as REBORRN initiated this CX Greece initiative, and we're really happy that now this has expanded quite a bit. So I think that we have a full house today. And what started as a smaller initiative, let's say, in order to explore what's happening in the customer experience sector. And to give some short history, we started with some, let's say, startups or scale-ups at the first event, talking about customer experience. We then moved into the incumbent space, so more bigger traditional companies and how they perceive customer experience. We then moved to more, let's say, specific niche topics, talking about last mile, delivery, these kind of areas. And right now, it's very interesting that we're taking a different approach and we are talking about EX and CX. So how employee experience, so first of all, what it is and how it can help us, and how it also connects to the overall and affects the overall customer experience. So I will pass the floor to Sanne. She will be hosting, she will be our facilitator for the day, along with a magnificent set of speakers, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Costa. Thank you. So big welcome to everybody for being here. It's really fantastic to see so many people here. We had even a massive wait list that thankfully Anna had managed really well to make sure that we could get everyone as much as possible in here tonight. First and foremost, this is not possible without the companies helping us to really support our communities. In this case, the CX Greece and HR Greece doing this combined event together. So I want to thank KAIZEN first and foremost. I think it's fantastic, that they give us this venue to host this, to have us also have some fun and some networking afterwards outside. But without companies supporting our communities, these kind of things cannot happen. On top of that, all of you being here, if I'd be standing here by myself, it would be pretty lonely. So with that said, what we'd also love tonight, tonight is we have a presentation by Veronika, we have a panel discussion as well, but we also want your interaction tonight. It's really important because only with shared knowledge can we actually gain more knowledge, yeah? So with that said, as Costa said, with CX Greece and having started that, the same story is with HR Greece that we have started now about 2.5 years ago, simply by starting a Slack group, getting people together, talking, sharing knowledge. The idea behind it is really that we feel that if in Greece we can share more knowledge across each other's companies, across with each other here, then we can also make sure that we can elevate ourselves in our knowledge. So that's what we're here to do tonight as well. And I'm very happy to welcome our first speaker. So Veronika is going to be taking us tonight, sharing some insights with us. She has a fantastic presentation. She's also going to give you some super practical things and information tonight. So I think you'll be excited to listen to what she has to say tonight. So big thank you to Veronika to come all the way from Berlin here tonight and to speak to us about our topic. Then a big thanks to Stella for being here tonight as well on the panel and also for hosting us here again at KAIZEN. And a big thanks to Andreas for being a speaker on the panel as well. So the idea tonight was to really have a mixed panel of speakers, not just from those with a people and culture background, but also those from a more business background or more an operations background. So we have quite a mixed panel here, which I think is going to be very exciting for tonight. So with that said, I'm going to turn mine off, and Vero, the floor is yours. One last little thing. For those of you who are within the CX Slack group, if you have questions that you don't really dare to ask and put your hand up because we are in a big group, you can post your questions also in the CX Slack group. And then Anna will tell us what those questions are, and we can ask those questions during the discussion as well. Yeah, so we'll follow those live. But again, this is a discussion with all of us as well, so if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand. And now I'll really pass it over.
Perfect. Now I'll try to stay here so that we don't have another one of the wake-up calls. If you get a little bit sleepy, I know it's like, after work, just let me know. I'll make a little step forward and then you wake up again. So, as Sanne said, I'm super happy, obviously, to be here. And I'm going to talk about the topic of, how actually employee experience and customer experience work together, whether they are a match made in heaven. Obviously, they are. So let me first get started and present you the menu for today. So I work in a food delivery company, so I thought that we might want to follow the theme of food also when we look at the agenda for today, for my part of the session. So first I'm going to serve you a little bit of an aperitif. So there's going to be an introduction, both in terms of who I am, what kind of company do I work for, so that you have a little bit of a background, and I think will be also interesting then for questions afterwards in the panel. Then, as a starter, we're going to talk a little bit about the similarities and differences between CX and EX. As a main, of course, is the point of the connection between the two of them. And then for dessert, and I'm a person that oftentimes I look at the desserts first in the menu, so the dessert is the one that I think might be the most interesting one, actually, which is a case study. So it's really about, what we do within my team, within the wider company, and maybe there is something, an idea or two for you that you can pick up and you can walk away with, because I always think that it's nice to hear very, high-level inspirational things in this kind of meetups, but sometimes also nice to mix it with a bit of practical stuff that you feel like, hey, actually tomorrow I can just go and try that within my team. And then, of course, as a digestif, we're going to have a Q&A part as well to this. So let's get started with the intro. So that's me. I want to tell you a little bit more about who I am, and I chose a few pictures that illustrate a little bit, who I am. So the first one is a pretzel. I'm originally from the south of Germany. This is where we make the best pretzels, believe me. So this is where I was born in Munich, so very much in the center of Bavaria, and this is where I come from. Then I feel like I'm really a true European. I lived in many different countries within Europe, spent quite a bit of time in Greece now as well. And I studied European studies, actually. So really, I think Europe is my home, and I can very proudly say that. I started my career actually in the HR space. That's how we used to call it back then. I know nowadays, usually people like to refer to it more by people and culture or something like that. I spent the first few years working for various different kind of startups in usually a generalist kind of HR capacity. Before then, I moved to Delivery Hero, and I was able to make a move actually and switch to a totally different department. And I joined an operations team. So there I was working really very much closely with the operations team of our different teams on the ground, improving their processes, introducing new tooling, doing whatever helps to actually make them more effective in their day-to-day work. Then I moved, 2 years ago, I moved into the consumer product team. So I am now working in a part of the organization that builds basically the application for the customers. And I lead a product operations team there, which you can see here. This is from, I think, last year's team event. And this is really something that, gives me a lot of joy. I really love, building up teams, developing teams, and just having very great teams, both in terms of engagement as well as performance. So this is really what gives me joy at work. And, it's one of these things that really gives me a lot of energy. And then, as I said, I could spend quite a bit of time in Athens now as well. My husband is originally from Athens, so this is the connection. So over the last few years, when we were also able to work, partly remote, I've really used the opportunity to spend more and more time here in Greece as well, and that's why I was so happy to also come here and speak today. So that's a bit about me. Now let's look a little bit about the company that I work for. So Delivery Hero, don't know how many of you know it. It's not really a consumer brand per se, so it's a company that you wouldn't know in that context, not as a user. It's a company that actually has, as we call it, a house of brands. So we are a multi-brand company that actually has many, many different consumer brands all around the world. We are in more than 70 countries, in almost all continents of the world, with the exception of North America and kind of Australia and Oceania. And we were founded in 2011, so now it's been around 12 years that we have been around. I think we've moved from this startup phase into scale up, and we also actually are stock listed company. So 2017 we were listed on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. Our headquarters is in Berlin, Germany, where I work as well, but we have tens of thousands of employees all around the world. When we look at the brands, maybe there are some that you are familiar with. I expect mainly one. I don't know, is there anyone that has never ordered from eFood here? Okay, good. I think that explains it all. So just imagine basically that we have companies around the world that do something very similar to what eFood does, right? So starting from the core business, which is basically restaurant food delivery, so your pizza, souvlaki, coffee, whatever it is, right? And then we ventured also into the quick commerce space, which also is something that eFood provides, right? Where you can basically order groceries, pet food, wine, whatever you want from different stores as well. So yeah, this is our business model. I think fairly easy and easy to relate to as well. Maybe some of you that have traveled a little bit the world recognize some of the other brands as well. Foodie in Cyprus, for example, or if you've been to like Northern or Eastern Europe, Foodora is our brand there in Asia, Food Panda, for example. But yeah, so this is the company that I work for. It's a little bit the context of it, but I think most of the stuff I'm talking about is not so specific to this company or to the specific industry. So let's talk a little bit about the similarities and differences. And when I was thinking about that, I was really thinking also about kind of my background and the experience that I have with both of these areas and also the similarities and differences that I saw. So the similarities first, right? Like these beautiful slices of bread. So they are different, but still they all have the same shape. So the first part is obviously, if you just look at the words, there is the word experience in both of them, right? I think that's the most obvious similarity. One is customer, the other one is employee, but it's really around experience. And I think experience is such a key word also in nowadays world, right? Everybody wants experiences, right? People are not just focused anymore on things, but really what they're looking for are experiences. The next thing is that it's about humans, right? In both cases, the real focus is on a human. Once it's an employee, another time it's a customer. But in the end of the day, they are not robots, right? They're humans, and humans come with different kinds of characteristics. It also is very much impacted by human emotions, right? So it's not that straightforward as in some other areas of the business where you can say, okay, if I do this, then this will happen, right? In both areas is a little bit more that, okay, you're measuring something, but at the same time, you don't know exactly if by the action that you're doing, you're gonna cause another thing, right? Because people don't work in that way. There are some emotions that can be triggered by something, right? Something good or something bad. Just a small thing can trigger that. And so it's something that's a lot more difficult to work with than in some other spaces. And then as well, I think measurement is a little bit similar. So I think in a lot of places you will see that the same kind of ways of getting information, so whether it be like surveys or interviews or something like that are being used. Also, the kind of metrics that are being used are very similar, right? Usually it's either CSAT or NPS. So I think there is a lot of similarities here that typically between other areas of the business, you don't find so much of these similarities. Then let's look also at some of the differences. So I think one that I call ease of access is basically how easy can you access the people that you want to optimize for, right? With customers, it's always a little bit difficult because they are not within your own kind of area, right? You need to somehow incentivize them that they are actually giving you the information that you'd like to get from them. Whereas, of course, with employees, technically you could just walk up to someone and you can kind of, get information. So I think there is where I see one of the major differences. Another one is also the relation that, whoever's trying to look at the space has to the user, so to the person that they're trying to find out more about. So in a kind of context with the customer, of course, the customer is technically free to give any kind of feedback, right? It's not going to have any impact on them, right? It's usually not that if you give a negative feedback on some service, then you'll be blocked from using the application or something. If anything, if you give a negative feedback, maybe they give you a voucher so you still come back because they understand you had a bad experience. Whereas like with employees, right, there is very often this kind of fear if especially if kind of more senior folks in the organization try to get this information, there is obviously some power dynamics that play into game. So people might sometimes not be as honest maybe or as constructive as they would like to be, because they are afraid that this might somehow have negative repercussions on them. And then the last one is also ownership. So typically in organizations, these two areas lie in very different parts of the organization, right? So usually employee experience lies somewhere within the HR kind of people space, and then CX usually lies either its own function or it lies with like marketing, operations, however the organization has it structured. Of course, I think for both of them, the organizations that I think have really understood and really want to focus on it don't outsource it to just like, you know, one department and be like, hey, CX is what you do and employee experience is what you do, but they make it part of really how they operate and also how they, you know, measure their managers, etc., etc. So then let's look at the connection, right? So if we look at the connection, I found a nice quote, which is by actually the founder of the Virgin Group. Maybe you know this is like a huge business group that has, I think, more than 400 companies. And he said that loyal employees in any company create loyal customers who in turn create happy shareholders. And I think this is really like emphasizing this chain basically, right? So if you have, you know, employees that are happy, that have a good experience, that are engaged, you will also have, you know, happy customers that stick around and that actually generate revenue for you, which then of course, in consequence, the business is performing well and the shareholders would like it. So of course, it's not always that straightforward, but I think it's interesting to see that, you know, a guy that has been so successful in business is actually stating this so clearly. There are a lot of studies, and I don't want to be too theoretical, right? Because I'm more of a practical person, but there's a lot of studies you can find. They actually really show the real like monetary value that, you know, engaged employees bring, and also how much of an impact it has on the different areas of the business, right? There's different studies with slightly different numbers, but in general you can see that of course engaged employees are a lot less sick or away from the office, let's say, and they are more productive, and they are also less likely to leave the company. On the other hand side, when you look at really the impact, you can see that they are, you know, they are better at, you know, doing good, you know, customer-facing things. So, for example, customer service, you would get better ratings. You would be able to see results when it comes to sales. So, really, kind of, you know, there's real business value when it comes to those things. I will encourage you to read a little bit on that also by yourself. I want to now dive into the case study because that's the part that I think is most interesting, at least I hope. And for that, I have just my own kind of personal recommendation. It's kind of a little recipe with 5 simple steps how actually employee engagement can be driven. Again, this is all based on my own personal experience, so you can take whatever you like and you can also just ignore whatever you don't like. The first step is to actually measure it. I think that's pretty straightforward, right? And I think, honestly, there is of course a lot of great tools out there that do that, but I think it can even be as simple as just using a Google form or even sometimes maybe having some conversations around that, right? But in order to really understand where you stand and then also to measure the progress, I think it's really crucial to measure it. So whether you want to use a sophisticated tool or not, I think there is of course the difference that, you know, the better tools, they have more functionalities in how you can anonymize the data so that people feel more free to share their feedback. How, for example, you can ask questions back to people who gave some feedback without revealing actually their identity. There is a benefit there, but I think it's like for organizations that maybe don't have a budget for this kind of tools, it's not a blocker, right? You can also just start with a Google form. Then, step 2 is driving a high participation rate. And this is something that I feel really passionate about, because I think if you do, you know, an employee engagement survey and you have 25% of your people only responding, then how are you going to create any actions that will improve that? Because you don't know if that is now just this 25% or this really stands for the wider population. So I think this is something that, you know, really you need to have as big of a share of the population answer so that you can create the best actions and drive the best improvements. So here you can just see, it's not the best chart, I took it from our tool, from our employee engagement tool, but basically the left line is kind of the participation rate of my team over the last year or so, and then the right one is kind of the benchmark from the company, but you can see that we have been always, I think, from 88 to 100% of participation rate. And that makes me really confident, you know, when we design things that actually aim at improving the engagement, that this is really relevant stuff. So you might wonder how to do it. So the simple way, and it really works, I've tested it a couple of times. So people are very bribable. So if you offer them a little, even just a little symbolic kind of reward for having a high participation rate as a team, that can do wonders. It's also because people, of course, don't want to be the only one that doesn't fill it and then not have cake for the rest of the people as well. But it's something quite fun that we have done a couple of times, and I mean, we've really reached 100% with that. More advanced step, and this is one of my colleagues, actually two of my colleagues, you will see. So one of them, he said that if they were gonna actually have a higher participation rate than the time before, he was gonna he was gonna do whatever they choose. And then they chose that for an entire week he had to come to the office in a 80s outfit. And he was posting about that on LinkedIn, so he's very proud of that. Another one, also interesting one, I'm going to play the video in a second. This is a colleague of mine, and he basically said that if they were going to have a high participation rate, he was going to do a speech as a Roman emperor, I think. He studied history, so there is a bit of thing to that. So we can look at it for a moment, but I think it's very enjoyable.
Green up because I will not be able to get through this without laughing otherwise. Hang on. All right.
There are some comments there in the chat that you should not be wearing a t-shirt
Under the
toga.
Yeah. So on that one, if I had a body like Elvis, that would probably be on the thing. But otherwise, I'm not going to give you all a nip slip. So the t-shirt is staying on. Okay. All right. 1 second. I'm hiding you all, otherwise I'll get super self-conscious. Okay, ready?
Yes.
Friends, foundatorians, developers, lend me your Zoom speakers. I stand before you not as a product lead, but as a man, honored by your commitment to sharing your thoughts, fears, pains, and desires in the illustrious P-Consensus. Your words are valued, and the Senate of the product line will debate these challenges at length and seek to forge a world in which you can achieve greatest for yourself, your teams, and for your organization. I reflect now on this auspicious day, celebrating where we are and how far we have come. Oh, how the wonder of Foundations has grown over the past 2 years, from the founding of a tribe, a fledgling group of humans with a vision of what was to come. Of a better world where pipelines were not flaky, cloud costs were not bankrupting, and clients run smooth. More have joined our ranks, and our communities have swelled. Some have left us, their Slack avatars grey and deactivated, lost to time and Spotify occasionally. Gone, but not forgotten, they mark our history, their names in the PRs and JIRA tickets that bind our foundation. We have faced many changes over the past years, the most notable of which is our alliance with our sisters and brothers in platform foundations, bringing together those that deal with the nerdy stuff, remaking the world and this Pandora infrastructure in our own way. They join us here today, one family, to celebrate together, and for this, I am grateful. To watch your successes, fighting for progress and building us not just to grow, but to scale. From the dominions of developer experience, the rolling fluid seas of UI UX foundations, through to the walled city of authentication, you are the peoples of foundations. We abstract away the complexity, enabling our colleagues to focus on what matters most, creating great experiences for our end customers. And it is through their work that your greatness truly shines. When seekers appear at our borders, looking to bring their labor and skills to our trade, to a new company, new team, I am frequently asked, what do I enjoy most under this pantheon of delivery hero? The answer is easy, good friends, it is you. The people that embody this great team, the wondrous group, a cosmopolitan melting pot of humans from across Gaia's green earth and blue and sandy places, bringing together skills, ideas, cultures, geographies, in a spirit of partnership. It is you, good friends, that make these days so incredible. So enjoy this enviable feast, bringing us together once again across the globe as we toil to reduce toil. So may your pipelines run fast, your experiments be statistically significant, and your OKRs green. So raise your glasses or cups, and I toast my tea to you, Foundatorians, the guardians of our infrastructure. Cheers.
I'll pass on the clap to my colleague tomorrow. Okay, so this is how you get a high participation rate. I think pretty straightforward. You can do that tomorrow. Just put it on a bed sheet and do a little speech. The next one is also, I think, very important because it's really about, sharing that, the leadership of the team, the department, the company, whatever it is, actually cares about the results. So I think it's very often that when people fill this kind of surveys, right, a little bit like with customers as well, that sometimes you don't really know where this is going. Is this really doing anything? You might fill it because you're like, yeah, I guess I should, but then you don't really see any action on that. And I think showing that, we care is one of the most important things. So that's why usually, once we finalized the round of the survey, like we share very transparently what was the outcome, what was the score for us as a team, what are going to be the next actions, a little bit also how that compares to benchmark, etc., etc. And people really like that. Then, as a fourth step, what we also do is that we set targets on improving employee experience, right? So we have the metrics, and then we use it as part of the frameworks that we use for other things as well. So we use OKRs for quarterly planning. So we have in there as well, in one section that's like on internal efficiency and agility, we have, either improving the engagement score. In this case, we had keeping it stable, because I think in these times it's not the easiest, and we had a very high score. So we actually wanted to just keep it stable. That was our target, but typically the other times obviously was about increasing it. Then you don't need to be able to read all this, but what we always do in the different sub-teams, so not as part of the wider organization, but in teams of maybe like 15, 10 people, we do a little workshop after each survey. And basically we show very transparently to them what were the scores for their sub-team on all the different drivers. And as the first step, we let them basically rate how important do they find the drivers for themselves. Because we found that sometimes it's not the best just to go by, the ones that have the lowest scores, because sometimes the one with the lowest scores are also maybe some that the people don't really care that much about. And maybe some others that have okay-ish scores actually are the ones where they really feel this is something super important. So we let the team first kind of vote, and then usually we select the top 2 or 3 topics, and then people break out into smaller work groups, and they really look at the root causes of these issues, let's say, right? So in this case, I think we had accomplishment and workload as 2 areas that the team had identified. So they kind of, find different root causes and group them a little bit, and then they look into how can we act on this, right? And the nice thing here is as well that, in terms of the actions, it's not just, hey, what can the company do for me so that this becomes better? But it's also things that within the team they feel like they can do in order to make that better, right? And then they already start assigning the responsibilities to different people as well. Sometimes if it's something that needs to be solved on a higher level, they would pass it on to their manager, for example. So this is something that I think we've done for 2 years or so, and it's something that really works very, very well. We also then, based on that, you saw that we had this line on improving the employee engagement score. We have actually underneath the initiatives, right? Some of them you would see they would be owned by me as the leader of the team, or some other kind of team leads below, but some are also just owned by just normal individual contributors that have said, hey, this is a topic that I would be happy to take on, and that I would be happy to drive maybe in a smaller group. So this has worked really, really well. Oftentimes these are things that come as an output from the workshop that I showed before. Now, I don't want to just say how to improve employee engagement, but I actually also want to show a little bit on how I think it actually affected the work results. So I need to just explain a little bit about one part of my team. It's a product support team. So it's a team that basically works internally within the company. They are part of the consumer product organization, but they basically are like a service department, right? So what they do is they look at the incoming bugs, for example, that come from the different business teams around the world. They provide training and documentation on the different features we have available on our application. They also answer any questions that the business teams have with regards to how to configure the tooling, and then they also manage the feature rollouts. So this is just context so that you know what team I'm talking about. So this team has a very, very high engagement. It's also the highest engagement within my wider team. This was from the summer. They had actually 85 ENPS. It's really quite impressive. And you can also see from some of these comments, right? People are really, really sharing that they are happy to, work at the company because of the culture, because of the people around them, because they feel like, they are appreciated, they have opportunities. So it's really something that is one that is reflected in the score, but also in the comments that they are making. Now, this team has two ways in which they are measuring their success. One of them is that they are looking at some key support metrics. And for those of you that maybe are a bit more familiar with kind of the customer service space, for example, they might be familiar to those. They are working on Jira Service Desk, so they basically have tickets, right? So anything that is ticket-based usually has some kind of metrics, like, for example, first response time or a full resolution time. Then what they also have is that they measure their stakeholder satisfaction. In this case, it's not end customers, right, because they are not a customer service team, but they measure it from their stakeholders on the business side and the local and regional teams, and also they measure from their colleagues in engineering and product management. So what we can see there, this team, basically, if you look at time to first response and time to resolution, which are these metrics, right? I need to explain, it's good if it goes down. So basically, the faster you are in giving a first response and the faster you are in actually solving the issue, the better it is, obviously, right? So you can see that there has been a very, strong decline on those. So really showing that, this team is really able to perform very well as well and also improve this really over time. If we look also at the stakeholder satisfaction, it looks a little bit like this because it's only measured, I think, every half year. But you also see that it's on the business stakeholders, it's at a very, very high level already. And then on the product and tech stakeholders, it's also going up. So these are really numbers that also show that, this engagement actually translates into great performance. And I think here as well, I think the, customer experience, their customers are basically internal, right? So that's what they look at. So yeah, that was it from my side. I hope I didn't go too much over time. Any questions that you have, of course, I'm happy to take, either now or then also in the now. Okay. Good. Yes.
You talked about engagement and measuring engagement. We have an internal debate. Which is better? Do you go for eponymous feedback or anonymous feedback?
Yeah. So we have anonymous feedback, but as you could see from the workshop, right, we do then a follow-up, which makes it be not anonymous anymore, right? So then there is the work groups where people also give more juice to that ratings that they give, right? Of course, they can also give feedback in the tool. And the nice thing is as well that in the tool, you can actually ask these follow-up questions without the person having to reveal their identity. But I think we see that for some topics, if we would just go and ask people like that, they wouldn't come with, especially like if you think about like one of the drivers of employee engagement often is like manager support, right? And if the person knows that their manager is gonna read that, hey, this person said that and that, because I don't know, they're treating them in a bad way and it needs to be solved and people above need to see that, I think that's very difficult to detect. So I like this kind of a mixture. To be honest, also when we do the workshop, typically the leaders of the team, they're in just in the very beginning and in the very end. So whilst they're discussing between themselves in the smaller groups, we don't want to give them somehow the feeling that, someone is watching and somebody's judging what you're saying. But we actually feel like it's working better that way, that in the end they come and they present the actions, but not so much while they're actually discussing. Yes.
If a peak on measurement, the engagement score drops, how do you know where to focus on?
So then again, I mean, in both cases, we do this kind of sessions to really understand. We, of course, have the drivers as well, right? So that we know like which of the sub-drivers of the main score actually dropped. I think more the challenge that we have is that typically in such a big organizations with thousands and thousands of people, of course, the generic question, the one that, would you recommend Delivery Hero as to your family and friends as an employer, is a little bit tricky because everybody associates something different with that, right? And sometimes, we might be doing a lot of things within like a smaller scope. And, people might be more happy about manager support, about growth, and about all these things. But then, I don't know, our CEO is making some announcement that makes them not happy or something. And then it obviously kind of, a little bit harms this. So that's why I would never look at just the NPS score and be like, hey, that's good, that's bad. I think it's an indicator, right? I mean, I cannot believe that, you know, if you have a really, really low score, that, oh yeah, everything is great, it's just that, you know, there is something. Or if it's really high, I also cannot believe that it is not connected. But indeed, it's a little bit of a challenging one. But generally, even if it's going down, we want to, of course, even more investigate what we can do in order to bring it back up again.
I saw in the slide with the OKRs that you mentioned that you want to keep peak and engagement score high. And I was very pleasantly surprised to see it there in product operations OKRs, because normally from personal experience also working with Pekin, it's usually the people and culture teams, not just initiating and driving those efforts, but also driving and I've never seen an OKR like in another team's goals, basically. So I was wondering, was this, given your background also in HR, was this something that came from you, or was this initiative driven by the people and culture HR team?
So actually, I would say none of the two. I'm sure there is someone in people and culture that also has as a target some score. And I think other departments as well, we have something on communication, so then the communications team would obviously have this. But actually, we have this as part of the entire product and tech organization. So we have this, actually what you saw, the objectives, we follow the same ones as they are there. And then the metrics underneath, wherever we feel like we can contribute, we actually have it there. So it's not something I came up with, but it's kind of the wider organization. Of course, I'm a very active advocate and maybe a little bit more passionate about that than others. But also now we have actually these this company-wide, we call it ABCs, so it's ambitions, big bets, and commitments. And even in there, which is something that everyone is supposed to follow, also in their goal setting, even in there you would find eNPS score. So it's expected actually that also the business teams, or whatever you want to call, have this as part of their targets. And we also oftentimes, for example, in calibrations, when we try to evaluate people's performance, particularly if we look at managers, we oftentimes actually look at also the eNPS, particularly at drivers like manager support or growth, where we really feel like a manager has actually a possibility to change that.
Great presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
You mentioned a previous slide with Virgin Media, and there is a study out there that improving customer experience, candidate experience, drives business results. Do you have any numbers or case studies on what you're doing internally with your candidates, with your employees' engagement is helping your organization drive better results?
So I mean, these are indirect, right? Because we are enabler functions, so it's not directly that we have some sales numbers going up or something like this. What we do have is more like, for example, also I used to work before more in the operation space, right? I've also seen case studies where they look at it more like in a customer service contact center context, where then you would be able to see the customer satisfaction with the interaction, for example, go up. Then again, you need to translate it, of course, into okay, how is that helping to retain customers? Maybe it improves their customer lifetime value. So I think this is always something that, ultimately there is this driver tree of these overarching business metrics. And of course, hopefully if we improve all the ones underneath, the upper one will also improve, right? But a direct connection, I think, is a little bit difficult. And also, I'm always a bit you cannot really A/B test these things, right? If, I don't know, that team, I focus particularly on the part where they are doing support and bugs. When you look at feature rollouts, it's much harder, right? Because there is, it's not like we can say, oh, we put 5 not engaged people on this, and then we put 5 engaged people, and we measure the difference, right? So that's why I think it's always a little bit tricky to directly connect that.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Hi there. Thank you for the presentation. On your last slide, I was impressed to see the drop in the handling time, the ticket handling time. So I wonder, in that drop, in that decline, what activities or initiatives happened that drove that decline on, I guess, the employee engagement?
So why I also connect this a lot to employee engagement is that There's really a lot of initiatives that the members of that team have actually initiated and also driven to improve, for example, the way that they work, right? The way they collaborate with their stakeholders that help actually to resolve the tickets, how they work with engineering, right? If something is a bug, it needs to be resolved that way. How they educate as well the stakeholders, the ones that submit the tickets, to actually provide all the info, right? So they do training sessions. How does a good bug report look like, right? And this is all like initiated by them. It's really their drive. They go out there and they're like, hey, how can I, be more effective? How can I also do things that maybe go beyond my usual space? And they know that, we're not going to hire more people. So they know that they have to become more effective in order to take on also some additional challenges. So that works within that specific team that's so highly engaged. It works really, really well.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Vero, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Fantastic presentation. We're going to start putting our panel together. I see that we have quite a lot of people sitting on the stairs. We have lots of room and space here. So please feel free to come and take those spaces and those seats in between here as well, so that we can get comfortable, and then we'll get comfortable, get seated with the panel here as well. Okay. I'd love to invite all of you, Andreas, Stella, Vero. Yes, I was wondering if this was like a setup specifically for us, with one blue chair and the others all red, but no, it was not intentional. Okay. So, moving on to our final part for tonight. We have a fantastic panel here for all of you. I'd love to first do a quick intro. I think, Vero, you have definitely introduced yourself, so I think I'll skip you for right now. But Stella, maybe you can give a brief introduction also to everyone here.
Okay. Hi, I'm Stella. I am a psychologist with a background in organizational psychology. I have been working during the past more than 20 years in the area of either human resources or HR consulting. And I have been with KAIZEN for the last 1 year and a half. Fantastic. As the Chief People Officer.
Fantastic. Andreas?
So, Andreas Constantinou, I am an engineer, so I'm the odd one in the room, feeling very a kind of out-of-body experience being in an HR conference. So I'm a tech guy who, over the years, from a micromanager became a servant leader and developed a passion for culture. And my new business is in culture, which is why I'm here.
Great. So we'll get started off maybe with a little bit of basics. I mean, I think that Vero has explained some of it already. But Stella, for those of us who are not super familiar with employee experience, employee engagement in particular, could you tell us a little bit what is employee engagement? And I'd love to kind of understand maybe some of the things that you and your team are doing here at KAIZEN.
Okay, let's start from the basics then. So employee engagement is about the emotional commitment that employees have with the company, and it's the perception that an employee builds for the organization where they work for, and it is built through different touch points that have to do from the beginning, from the attraction time when we contact an employee in order to join, let's say, a company, and it moves to the onboarding, the performance management, the development of the employee, even the exit. So the employee engagement is something that is being built throughout the time that an employee stays with the company. So a company has many opportunities to build it. It's not like you are very engaged in the beginning, for example, because you are new and everything is fresh, and then this drops down, let's say, moving forward during time. It's something that, as Vera showed, that many times per year we need to measure, understand what is happening, and build on it.
Mm-hmm. And what are some initiatives that you and your team have taken?
Okay. The most important thing is to measure, because if you don't measure, you don't know and what's happening. And measuring, it's not a one thing, it's not one number that the engagement score is 8.3. Okay, what does that mean? You can break down these metrics in different dimensions. So you check what happens in different countries, in different age groups, in different sex, in different division departments, in different drivers. So somehow in all those analyses, you will find where the problem is in different, let's say, teams, departments, managers. There is something. Maybe it's not one thing. There are different things in different teams. Sometimes it's one thing that bothers everybody. Sometimes there are different things that are breaking down if the engagement score is, let's say, lower than what the organization wants. What I liked about Deliver Hero that Vera showed is it is a culture to promote the participation in the engagement. So Vera showed 3 different managers, herself included, of how they are managing the participation and what extreme ways, which I like to really very much, they are finding in order to promote this. And if you don't share how you feel about the organization, how things can be improved. So if you don't promote this culture, how is this possible to, let's say, get better?
Yeah.
So some of the strategies, sorry, because you asked this.
Yeah.
The strategies for me are some tangible, some intangible. So the tangible ones have to do with how we contact you when you are a candidate, how we develop you when you join, what is the performance management system, what are the opportunities for growth, what is the talent management program, what are the learning opportunities, are you getting promoted? And then there are other things, the building, for example, we care about your well-being. And there are intangible things like what is the culture of the organization? Can you connect with the values that we have? What is the strategy? Can you link your evolution, your career evolution with this company? Do you see a future? So there are things that you can do practically, let's say, and I'm not mentioning at all money and benefits, etc., because I don't believe they are increasing engagement, although it's a driver. But there are other things that are most important for people to connect themselves with a brand, with a company, with a vision of someone, or with the values. So this is something that we neglect, I believe, sometimes.
Yeah.
How important it is for people.
Very nice. And I want to hook on to a little bit what you said before with what Vera was mentioning about the managers really taking charges. And maybe a question for the audience, for all of you. Who here feels that, employee engagement is really driven by their people and culture team versus managers being included? Would love to see a show of hands. Not too many. So who here thinks that managers are heavily involved in promoting employee engagement and especially scoring? Okay, very nice, good. And that was also going to be a little bit my question about, how do you push for that? How do you push more for having managers being involved within this? We saw some really great examples here on that. What are other things that managers could do that could really help to push the employee engagement scores to attend and achieve? And I think you gave some nice examples of we do a workshop together. Do you see that there are specific tangible things that come out of those workshops that really help to drive that?
Yeah, so definitely some of the things, right? They were even around improving processes, or people wanted to learn more from people in other parts of the company. So someone took this on and said, I'm organizing a regular kind of meeting where people that do also product support in another part of the company come, to us and tell us what they are doing. But then as well, of course, we do things on a more higher level, which is more as a leadership team, right? We don't let it just to the employees to do the whole job, because we think it's important to have both. So we also have, for example, if we identify that, maybe someone mentions in the comments that, they feel like they don't always know where they stand in terms of performance, right? So what we introduced is something that it's not official by the company or by the people department, but we have regular performance check-ins every 6 months. But what we do is we do a mid-semester check-in for everyone within the team, right? And we basically find a target, 100% of the people should have a mid-semester check-in. So then, this didn't come back ever, this concern, and people really appreciated having this check-in in between. It's not a big thing, but I think by institutionalizing that, it was really something that we do. Or as well, we try to see, hey, how can we, beyond these monetary benefits, right? How can we actually give people experiences they are looking for? So for example, in my team, there is a lot of people that, maybe they're not yet that experienced in their career. Maybe it's the first company they're working for. Maybe they have worked for smaller companies before. So we have a certain, opportunity that we can also travel within the different locations, because we are a very global company and we have a certain budget for that, right? Now, of course, you can say, okay, it makes sense for the leaders of the teams. They can go and to the other place where they have some of their, reports, and, it makes sense. At the same time, the benefit or the value that this is for these people that maybe they have been traveling a lot already in their career is not really so much there, right? And I think we have learned in these times we can do a lot on Zoom. So what we did instead is that we looked at, okay, how much budget do we have left until the end of the year? And we really went through all the list of people. We found out also who is interested in traveling, because we have no intention of sending someone that doesn't want. And the ones that were interested, they were basically able to make a case for why would they like to travel, right? What's the business value that they are going to generate on this trip? And then many of them went. And I think this is one of these things that I think you always need to work with what you have, and to know how your people tick, what is, valuable for them, and what can you provide, of course, as well, without necessarily having to go big rounds to like the C-level of the company, right?
Nice. Andreas, your company Rethink Culture has measured the culture of over 20 companies. And so I'm wondering, when you think of culture and employee engagement, how important is it to ensure that leadership, or what is really the involvement of leadership there? How pivotal is it for companies that they get on board and understand it?
So in Greece, we say the fish stinks from the head. And I think we say that in other cultures as well. I was listening to a guy called Arnie Malham. He was a guest in the Rethink Culture podcast. And his story is he was a micromanager, like me, who didn't realize he was a micromanager. And he had a very niche company that no one wanted to work for. And he said, after 10 years of trying to build the company, he heard someone say, culture reflects leadership. So the culture of the company reflects what the leader does or does not do. And he said, oh shit, it's me. I'm the reason that the culture is the way it is. And it was a eureka moment. And he, over the next 10 years, he turned it into a company that people wanted to visit because they heard that employees there were having fun. And they wanted to see, how did you create a company where employees are actually having fun? I want to take a look. And then he wrote a book called Worth Doing Wrong, where he described how the company works. So that's the story. It's not my story. It's Arnie's story. Having been a CEO, and a CEO who wasn't self-conscious about the climate I was creating, I have seen the damage it can do, and I have seen the benefits of being very intentional about culture from just about anything, from the safety you give to people in terms of how you communicate messages, especially in times of difficult challenges like COVID or reductions or people reductions and so on. The relationship you build with people, how well does each manager know the people? Like one of the questions in the questionnaire for the culture health score that I do is, does your manager know about the people and the things that are important in your life? Because that is like, it's an very indirect question, but it's very direct, because if they do care, they will have a good relationship with you. And so it goes all the way to purpose and potential, and do you believe in what the company is doing? All of these questions and all these behaviors impact culture, and they are very much driven from leadership. 100%.
Very nice. So let's talk a little bit more, go back a little bit, Stella, on metrics. We heard it quite a lot. You mentioned before you're measuring a lot with the culture, with Rethink Culture. Vero's done a lot, showed us a lot about measurements as well. Stella, when you think of could you tell us a little bit about what are you measuring at Kaizen? And then also I'd love to understand, how do you distinguish the difference between engaged and disengaged employees?
In Kaizen, we're measuring everything. We have something. are a little bit stuck with metrics.
Is there a
So,
scan?
exactly. So we measure the candidate experience, the onboarding in the first month, the onboarding in the third month. Then we have 3 engagement surveys per year. Then we have the Great Place to Work survey. Then we have the performance management twice a year, the peer feedback that the employees give for their peers, the 360 where the employees are twice a year evaluating their managers. So, I mean, there are so many touch points that we get feedback all the time. I mean, we don't only get feedback, we do something with it, of course. So, but throughout the year, I believe that at all times we have a presentation analyzing data. I believe that this has to do with the fact that Kaizen is growing really fast, so we need the feedback because it's not a stable situation. We're opening 4 new markets per year. More than 1,000 employees are joining every year, so we need to know where we stand. And every 1 to 3 months, there is a survey about that. So we analyze a lot of data.
So I do have to ask, do you have a lot of survey fatigue in the company?
Yes, maybe.
Okay.
Are you baking cakes?
We have an HR fatigue because HR needs to prepare all those presentations, of course.
Yeah, fair enough. Yes, I can imagine. So, yes,
You
please.
said about engaged and disengaged employees.
Yeah.
So we cannot differentiate somehow engaged through disengaged employees because we don't know specifically who is disengaged. But through the analysis, we understand where are more disengaged employees. As I said, we are making the analysis based on different factors. So we are ready to understand, is it in Greece the problem? And in Greece, is it in Thessaloniki? Is it because people cannot access the office because it's the flyover? For example, they have a facilities issue? Is it because a manager in a specific team does not give feedback, does not care for the employees, and the manager driver is low? Is it because it's the workload in some teams? So we're trying to understand where the issue is. And then, as Vera said, we have our learning department has created a workshop that it's like a template for all departments. We are asking the managers to implement these workshops because this is the culture that we want to promote, that it's a manager responsibility to have a team of engaged employees, not the HR. So we are there to support with the HRBPs and with the tools, but we are not there to take their own responsibility. So we have designed a workshop that leads to specific results. What we had seen in the past is that through those workshops, all the issues were somehow allocated to the management, to the company. There was this ghost person or company that was responsible for all the bad things happening in a team. So, and we saw that through these workshops, people would not take their own responsibility of what we can do as a team in order to move things forward. So then we changed the workshop in a way that leads people to take their own responsibility. And it's part of the agenda, let's say, that whatever we'll discuss today is only the actions that we can take as a team, not what we expect from the company, because this is the easy way to get rid of the responsibility. Like the company needs to do this, that, or the other, and then who is the company? It's all of us in reality.
Indeed. So let's switch maybe a little bit to more the CX side of things. And Vero, maybe pointing out also a couple of the things that what you said in your presentation, but how do we really embed this kind of customer-centric mindset using perhaps employee engagement initiatives?
So I mean, obviously I work for the consumer platform, so for us customers are really key. And actually another one of our objectives is really focused on customer experience, right? So I think it's also by the strategy that it gets driven a lot. Of course, there are some people that, you know, maybe work on something very back-endy, right? Like that team that my colleague Curtis is working in. They have they can maybe more indirectly impact, but others maybe more directly. So I think it's something that, you know, we always put on the forefront. Of course, there's also teams like UX Research, for example, right? That they really bring those customer experiences more practically to life. So we oftentimes have them share in our, like, you know, department town halls, for example, the findings that they have. Sometimes we even play some recordings of some user interviews and stuff so that we don't lose the touch to the actual customers on the ground. And I think then there is also a lot of this that people then that are engaged and that feel passionate about doing something good actually connected that are like, but why don't we have that? Why can't the person find this here? We also had something on accessibility, for example, right, which is also a big factor when you think about customer experience, particularly customers that have some kind of impairments. And then there was this collaboration that I think the team did with Google, if I'm not mistaken, and there were, you know, a few customers that actually have these impairments, and they were trying to use our applications, and they were struggling so much, and people were really like, you know, kind of emotionally connected to that, and they were really like, yeah, but I want to fix it right now, right? So I think this is how we try to do it. Of course, it's difficult because we are across so many different markets, and actually in the headquarters in Berlin, we don't even have operations, so it's sometimes a bit of a challenge, but we really try to bring the customer as close as we can to us.
Nice.
Yeah.
So our world changed a lot with COVID, and now we are questioning oftentimes also if we're trying to reverse that somewhat, particularly the hype topic, obviously, that comes forward a lot. And Andreas, I want to kind of guide this towards you, is on remote working, or let's say a hybrid form of that. So we see that obviously with COVID, everybody had to go remote, or everybody that could go remote had to go remote. And we are seeing now that companies are also starting to reverse that, are starting to say everybody needs to go back to the office as well. But I'd love to kind of understand how you think this more remote work, how the hybrid work, how has this really impacted employee experience, and then in turn also impacted customer experience?
So I'm reminded the employer of my life partner, like many other employers, say you have to come back to the office because that's the way we maintain our culture. Okay.
I've heard that before.
Who is against that statement? Okay. All right. Good to hear. I come from a very different background. So my company, SlashData, we were remote first, and after the first lockdown, people didn't show up in the office, or very few people showed up in the office. So we said, we don't need the office, we just go full remote. The culture, I think, is not a function of whether you're in the office or not. It's a function of whether we are intentional about the way we connect as people, the way we connect to the mission of the company, the way we communicate, the way we share goals and purpose, the way we hire, the way we fire. Nothing limits this to online or offline or physical or remote or anything. But some habits are really hard to let go of. And I think we don't challenge our assumptions when it comes to physical work. And yes, we are habits of connection. We are creatures of connection, of that we communicate through physical, interaction and physical contact. And so, but there are so many ways in which we can actually replace all those touch points of physical connection with remote connection. And for example, one of the fun things we do at SlashData is when there's a birthday, we celebrate it over Zoom. And it's fun because it's a complete cacophony. So, Zoom doesn't really synchronize well. So you just hear everyone saying happy birthday, and sometimes in different languages, and it comes up as noise, and it's fun. You could never do that in a physical environment. So a challenge is an opportunity, right? It's a new way for people to interact and connect. And we just need to discover these ways. It's not that they don't exist or that they change the culture. They can add to the culture rather than retract from it. Yeah. And I'm probably not answering your question.
I'm not fully there yet, but
I also have actually, I was checking this morning because I remembered a case study from the end of 2020. So I was working in the team that was building the product and technology for the contact centers. And I remember our colleagues from Latin America, they were presenting a really interesting case study how with COVID, obviously it was super challenging. They had to move all their customer service agents to work from home. They didn't have like, even laptops and stuff like that. So it was very challenging. But then they moved into this setup where, people could work from home. And that was actually, in the end of the day, was leading to higher productivity and better customer satisfaction, because they had this issue that then in a lot of their places where they had their contact centers, people would actually have to travel a long time to work, right? Because in a lot of Latin American cities, they are really big, and you can't afford to live in the center if you're a customer service agent. So they would travel like really long time, and they would then offer people the opportunity to work from home. Was also more convenient for the company because they could easily do this kind of split shifts, that you could never do with somebody at the office. You can't say you work 3 hours, now you make a 3-hour break, and then you work 3 hours because this is the times when people order food, right? Whereas from home, this was like super convenient. There were a lot of people with young kids that could combine that, and actually both the employee engagement as well as the actual business metrics were really a lot going up. I don't know exactly where they went with that after that, but I just checked the presentation this morning, and it was really, really impressive.
Nice. Yeah. So we're talking about challenges that we've encountered. COVID was definitely a challenge for many businesses. I think it also has changed a lot for us in the world. But Stella, what do you at KAIZEN see as like some of the core challenges that you have with employee engagement, and how do you tackle them? How do you also choose which to tackle?
Okay. The example that you mentioned now for the hybrid, I find it a challenge. Most employees want a more flexible, let's say, working model, and there are roles more difficult to find in the market, let's say tech product roles, where as a company we have decided to give more flexibility compared to other roles. So this still is a challenge for the engagement, because on the one hand, you have more engaged the tech and product people. On the other hand, the rest feel that maybe this is unfair, that you have, so you are trying to serve the needs of the different, let's say, types of roles, but on the other hand, you are losing something. So this is one of the biggest challenges, because we are looking to hire a lot of tech and product people, and it would be impossible if we stick to a more office-based approach. It will be impossible, so we have to do it. But still, there is a challenge for the engagement of the rest. This is one of the challenges that we're facing right now. Another thing that I'm thinking is that all the hybrid model brought into the surface the dysfunctions of the managers. So before that, when we were all in the office, it was easy to be a good manager, because you would see your people every day in the office, and by slapping the shoulder, you thought that you are managing them. So people thought that, they have the connection, hi, how are you doing? Well, the water cooler effect, etc. But when you went back home, you need to be a real manager. You need to put the effort, the time, the attention. You need to follow up. You need to monitor the performance. You really need to put time in order to be a good manager and control what is happening in your team. And I don't think that all the managers, I'm not meaning KAIZEN, I mean generally, have developed those skills. Or the companies have invested in developing those skills. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know. I think Greece is a little bit behind in that skill. That's my experience so far.
So we need to work on our managers.
Yes. So we need to invest a lot in the managers and how they perceive their roles. It's not only about the tasks, it's also about managing people. When you are a manager, this is the task. It's to actually bring the result through others, not actually do the work. So it's a transition that needs to happen, which before COVID or before the hybrid model was not so visible, I think.
There's also the Peter principle that says employees are promoted to their level of incompetence, which means you're an individual contributor, and you keep getting promoted, and then sometime you become a manager, right? But not everyone can be a good manager, and certainly not everyone is trained to be a good manager.
Yeah.
And so at some point you get promoted to the level of being incompetent because you're a great individual contributor, but you're lousy as a manager.
Yeah. I think we could have a whole new session on managers when it comes to that. Very, very interesting topic, and I would definitely have a lot of questions and lots to talk about there. But let's keep going back to our last. We're getting to time as well, so I want to make sure that we're getting to it. I think one of the things before our sessions here, Andreas, I was listening to your podcast as well, which I think is very interesting, really nice to focuses really on topics, and you have people in your podcast who are here within Greece, but you also have international people. You already mentioned one of the examples that stood by, and I'm not mistaken, this company that he ran, was it a waste management company?
No, it was a very niche company. It's marketing for personal injury lawyers.
Right.
So it's as boring as it gets.
Quite odd. Indeed. So thinking about like your podcast and like when you think about particularly our topic today, right? What is something that you would say this is something that really stood out for me, or this is something that was definitely a new learning for me on this?
From the guests?
Yes.
Lots. So one is the podcast you refer to, waste management. The name of the guest escapes me, but you can find it on the podcast, the Rethink Culture podcast. So there's this person in Ireland with a passion for service, customer service, right? CX. And he says, actually, he looks at his parents and the way a particular operator, network operator, treated his parents. And they are elderly parents. They're on the phone with a network operator, and they're being passed from customer rep to customer rep non-stop. And it takes a very long time for them to find a solution to the problem, if at all. So he says, I want to build a company that treats customers the way I would like a company to treat my parents, with a focus on service. And so it happens that he lands across this opportunity in waste management. Now, waste management is, bulky men picking up trucks and picking up the rubbish bins and emptying them, It's a very kind of masculine, but also a service poor industry, because it's just a pick up drop off thing, and it's dirty and all sorts of things. And he says, I want to really make a difference to the industry. So what he does is he creates this company which picks up dustbins with a focus on service. He ended up growing it to over 3,000 people in several countries, and I think he's probably sold it by now, with a focus on customer service. So one of the anecdotes he talks about in the podcast is this: that in the early days, in the 80s, there was one of his delivery people, and he got a call from a customer and says, "Oh, your delivery guy just cornered me and almost pushed me out of the road as he was driving." And he finds out who the driver was. He talks to him and say, "You go to that lady and you apologize." And this was the 80s, right? Now you cannot do this. And he had the guy buy flowers and give it to the lady who he pushed over. So that was his emphasis, his love about customer service. That in every single thing that he's designed in the company is to provide the best customer service there is.
Nice. So as we round up today's discussion, I'd like to hear maybe from each one of you. I'll start with Stella and just kind of go down the seats as it is. What is the one takeaway, or what is like one thing that you could give to this audience today that you would say, like, this is something that if you're wanting to either get more into employee engagement, if you want to measure one thing, if you want to focus on one thing, or if you want to implement something, what would that one thing be? Or what would, if it's a few things, maybe one thing or a few things that you would focus on, what would you give with?
I would say to create a feedback culture. I mean, this is for me, if there is one thing, it's to be open to listen. And when you listen, you can improve. So if you can improve the employee engagement, then you can improve the customer experience, then you can have targets, then you can have actions. But still it starts with whether you are open to listen. Because when you listen, you will receive feedback that you don't like. So you need to be open to this.
Yeah,
it is the starting point.
fair enough. Andreas, what's it for you?
Maybe one or two things. So firstly, I really subscribe to the paradigm you take care of the people and the people take care of the business, which is so hard but so motivating and purposeful. And one of the differences that you didn't talk about between EX and CX, which I think is really important, is we talk so much about CX, but we talk so little about EX.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that we talk too much about CX, but we definitely don't talk enough about EX. We don't, I mean, employees are there every day, and we don't care as much about the people in our business as we care about the customers in our business. And I would argue that a healthy business is one that puts equal time and attention to not just the shareholders or the owners, but also the customers and the employees. And I think we need to become much more conscious about paying attention to employees and the employee experience. And finally, we need to start or stop thinking about people as resources. And unfortunately, the term HR, R stands for resources. And we need to start thinking about people as humans and about people and culture as opposed to human resources.
Very nice.
Very nice. I agree, actually a little bit building up on that, what you say. I think for me, it's really like the genuine care for the topic of employee experience, right? And I think particularly what you mentioned earlier also on, like, you know, it comes from the top. I think there is a lot of companies that, you know, they have it somewhere there. There is like one, two people that they are supposed to look after that. And it might be somewhere in a nice presentation or somewhere in some targets. But then I think it can only work if you genuinely care both about, you know, the results of the surveys, but also about people in general. I think this is something that is still lacking a lot of times. I think some people have moved into the stage of, okay, I know it's important, so I'll pretend that I care. But I think we really need all managers, right, and all leadership to really genuinely believe in that, and then also generally transport that in that way to employers, because I totally agree. I think in the end of the day, you can always find great people that can do great things, right? But what you need to make sure is that these people are actually, you know, happy to work in that place, and they are happy to give their best, to think outside of the box. And if you don't create that environment, then you won't get the business results either.
Very nice. Great. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sanne.
Thank you. I don't know if there's any particular questions in the audience that you want to ask the panelists in particular. Yes, Adonis.
First of all, thank you very much for the wonderful, very different perspectives here. Much appreciated. I have a question to Stella, actually. So what you mentioned really resonates with me about creating a culture of feedback. Tremendously important and tremendously difficult to create in a culture like the Greek culture, which doesn't, I wouldn't say that it's reputable for accepting or welcoming feedback, right? So I'm wondering if you have some maybe tips or strategies about gradually promoting that within your organization.
Okay, Of course, I understand what you mean, but it starts with us being the role models. So even if you work for an organization that doesn't have any tool, you can still have a meeting asking the team to give the feedback or creating a Google form and checking specific dimensions for which you would like some feedback. Is it either engagement questions or something that has to do with the ways of working or something that has to do with how the team relationships are at the moment, or I don't know. So talking to people and asking them to share their opinion and then do something about it, because it's one thing to ask for the opinions, and then if you don't do something, people get disengaged. So if you are planning to ask, you need to be ready to do something about it. Otherwise, people will not answer again to a survey. So the action part for me is very important. Even small things. And also, another thing that we do is that maybe we take the actions, but we don't connect them with the feedback. So it's important that every time that we take an action, we explain to people that you shared this feedback with us, we took this action, and this is the result. I'm doing this because you asked me to do it. It's not necessarily self-explanatory that people will realize that just because I said it, it happened. We need to remind people that there is a connection.
And to add to that, a reason people sometimes don't give feedback is simply because they don't feel safe. That the feedback can be used against them or any other thing. And so you need to build trust before you ask for feedback. Otherwise, the feedback will be partial, will be, like for example, Gallup doesn't use StrengthsFinder for interviews, and one of the reasons being that people change the behavior when they're taking the personality test, when they know they're being, interviewed for a job. So you need to build the trust, and the trust starts with vulnerability, like Patrick Lencioni says, like Brené Brown says. Vulnerability starts with the acceptance of recognizing our weaknesses and our mistakes. And that's a longer discussion, but that's where you need to start, I think, before you ask feedback.
And Adoni, I want to add something else. To check, if you want, what is the psychologically safety. Because it happened that today we had a workshop about that with my direct reports, because we wanted to see how psychologically safe people feel within this team and what are the actions we can do to improve it. So I find it very valuable, because if you want people to share, they need to feel safe, what you said. And there are ways to measure it and improve it.
Very nice. Any other questions? Right at the top.
This question is for you, Stella, because of the growth. So you mentioned surveys. Your company is survey happy, which is fabulous because you are getting feedback, and it seems like you are actioning on the feedback. With growth, because you mentioned 4 new markets every year and you have growth, does that feedback get lost in the growth? How are you managing when you're bringing on new recruits? How are you managing your candidate experience? Are there extra steps aside from the surveys that you're doing to keep candidates engaged, keep your employees engaged during a high growth time? Because sometimes it can get lost in the shuffle. So I'd be curious to see how you're managing that growth.
Okay. So it's not getting lost because we are very committed to it. So if you are an employee that you are 1 month with the company, you participate in these surveys or even the engagement surveys. So we listen to your feedback even if you are very fresh in the company. And the fact that we are opening new market doesn't mean that the rest of the company doesn't work in the regular ways of presentations, getting the feedback, analyzing the comments, doing the workshops, getting some actions. So this is an agenda of specific roles also in the HR to follow up on the actions. So it's not getting lost. And it's throughout the year, there are several touch points. I mean, there are always candidate surveys, for example. There are always onboarding surveys. The first month, the third month, we follow up on this. We check it regularly every month. We send statistics to all the managers. They know which departments have, let's say, low engagement in the onboarding process. So, for example, an action that came out through these surveys of the onboarding was the fact that, okay, there was the typical HR, let's say, onboarding, but then not every department had the functional onboarding in place. So some people would get lost in what do I need to do after the first month. So then, with the help of the learning department, we created the functional onboarding for every department. So now there is a process for the first 3 months for everyone in the organization. So we do something with the feedback. When we see that there is an issue, we do something to build upon it. Of course, I'm not describing here the, the magic picture. It's we have a lot of issues, and new issues arise the more people are adding in the company, the more countries are adding, but we are on it to solve things. But it's a constant battle to find the issues and solve them.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? No? Then I think it's time for some drinks. Great, thank you everyone very much.
Thank you, Sanne.
Thank you very much.